Ezekiel 33:3.
All right, welcome everyone to the Wednesday Bible studies. Today we'll be covering Exodus chapters 4 to 6. I've got some special content as well at the end, and I've also made a new trailer for the channel. I'll actually be placing it onto Facebook in the next couple days here and doing some paid advertisements to try to promote the service. So that's going to be the trailer that'll play on Facebook. I'll probably have it on there for about 7 days. Hopefully I can get a couple thousand people to look at it, and hopefully it helps some people out. So we're going to start off with our Bible study. We're looking at Exodus. So we left off last week where Moses had went towards a burning bush. He saw an angel of the Lord. The bush wasn't being burned, and the bush, a voice came out and told him to come closer. So we left off where we had this conversation. God revealed himself. God revealed himself with the name Eya Asher Eya, which is I am that I am, or to be or not to be, as Shakespeare would say. Just a reminder, that was Exodus 3:11. It says, "But Moses asked God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?' 'I will surely be with you,' God said, 'and this will be the sign that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, all of you will worship God on this mountain.' Then Moses asked God, 'Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you.' And they ask, 'What is his name? What should I tell them?' God said to Moses, 'I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you.'" Now, I'm going to quickly point out something here just before I keep reading. Notice what it says here. It says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites." So this is Moses saying, suppose I go to my own people and I say to them, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you." And they ask me, "What is his name?" That's important. You can tell right there, the Israelites don't have the name of God. They wouldn't be asking what is his name, assuming that they had the name. So here you can see that this title El Shaddai means God Almighty. It shows up in earlier parts in the Bible when it has when there's conversation between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with God. And here we can see that Moses is specifically asking for the name. So I always like to clarify that Exodus 3 is where we get the name. God also told Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered in every generation." So the confusion comes in here. When people read verse 15, they see the word Lord, and Lord is a title, and then they see up above where it says name, and then they start connecting Yahweh, Jehovah with the name. That's not the name that's being given here. The name explicitly given is I am who I am. And that was the name that Christ referenced as well, when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." So now we're going to start our overview of Exodus chapters 4 to 6. So starting with Exodus 4. Moses speaks to God at a burning bush in the Sinai desert. So we're carrying on from there. So if we take a look at the map here, here's the Sinai Peninsula. And you can see here, Mount Sinai, this is where Moses is. So this whole area here is the Sinai wilderness, or the Sinai desert. And this is important to know because there's some confusion in regards to the reference of the mountain in the Bible. It shows up with multiple names. Exodus 3:1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness, and he came to the mountain of God unto Horeb. Okay, so Moses went to Mount Horeb. Horeb. Here's actually an image of Mount Horeb. So this is a photo that was taken in fairly modern times of the mountains in the Sinai Peninsula. Don't some books call the mountain Sinai instead of Horeb? Some of you might even have in your head, oh yeah, Mount Sinai, the place where Moses went. But it also says Mount Horeb in the Bible. If we take a look at Exodus 19:18, it says, "Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln. The whole mountain trembled greatly." So clearly, this is when Moses was on top of the mountain and he's receiving the law. So we have a problem here. This was the same mountain that Moses has went to initially when God had revealed himself in Exodus 3. In one verse, we see Sinai, which is Exodus 19. And then in the other one, we see Mount Horeb. Clearly, they're the same spot. Horeb is thought to mean glowing heat, which seems to be a reference to the sun, while Sinai may have derived from the name Sin, the Sumerian deity of the moon. Thus, Sinai and Horeb would be the mountains of the sun and moon, respectively. So, when you study the Bible very, very closely, you'll find out that there's actually a game of thrones, just like the television show. Basically, there is the camps of Edom and the camps of Ishmael. And if you read in the book of Psalms, you can see that they're basically fighting for the next position. And they're trying to keep Jacob forgetting who he is. So, in other words, Israel lost his identity. Here we see that the mountain of God, there seems to be competition for it. We've got the name Sin, as in Sinai, or we have Horeb. So we've got sun and moon. Now, we've seen through the whole Old Testament a cult that came from Babylon, where there was some religions associated to the sun and some associated to the moon. And we can see amongst the Edomites and the Ishmaelites later in the Bible, they're competing with each other. Now, if we take a look at the Ishmaelites of today, so in other words, Islam, on top of the mosque, you will see a crescent moon. Is it possible then that Horeb and Sinai are actually tied towards the gods of the pagan nations that surrounded them? And it's almost like the sun and moon, or the false worship, was trying to take over the true mountain of God. We also see in Galatians 4:24 to 25, these things are taken, or are being taken figuratively. The women represent two covenants. One covenant is from Mount Sinai and bears children who are to be slaves. This is Hagar. Now, Hagar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present city of Jerusalem because she is in slavery with her children. So here's something interesting. Hagar was the other wife of Abraham. So what ended up happening was he was married to Rebecca. Rebecca was unable to have a child. And so what ended up, I have the wrong woman. It's Sarah. So Sarah was barren. She was unable to have a child. And so she gave Abraham, her husband, her slave maid, which was Hagar. And Hagar was picked up when they had went to Egypt, and then they had left. That was among the maidservants and manservants and all the items that they had left with. So if you look in the book of Galatians, Mount Sinai is being overlapped with Hagar. Now, Hagar, if we take a look, if Hagar had a child called Ishmael, and Ishmael eventually went on to lead Islam, what we see is a connection here to the idea of Mount Sinai, Hagar, and slavery. So in the Bible, we see in the New Testament that we have children, or just people in general, that are slaves to sin. That's the exact language used in the New Testament. Now, sin, we can also see as being an old god in Mesopotamia, Samaria. Sin Nana was the name of a moon god. So perhaps this concept of Hagar being connected to the idea of Mount Sinai, and there's one covenant for Mount Sinai and obviously one covenant for Mount Horeb, perhaps the symbol of the moon was associated to the children who were going to be remaining under slavery. In other words, the children of sin, whereas the sun was going to be representative of the children of righteousness. Now you start to understand why in Ezekiel, the sun is such a threat, because out of the sun and the moon, the one that is the most likely to take away the disciples of Christ is the sun. In Exodus 4, Moses continues his dialogue with the Lord. He actually tells him that he's going to provide 3 signs to his people. So that way his people would believe him. Because, of course, the concern of Moses was that when he went back to the tribes, they wouldn't believe that he had spoken to God. So one sign was to take his staff, throw it on the ground, and his staff was going to turn into a serpent. The other sign was that Moses was to take his hand and then stick it into his cloak, and it would come out leprous as snow. So in other words, it's talking about Moses' hand turning white. When I looked at the word leprous, I don't think it actually is the word leprous, because when you take a look at the translation in the Bible, you'll find that that word can have a lot of different meanings. What could be being communicated in this verse may not be leprosy, because leprosy doesn't make the skin go white. If you take a look at lepers, you'll find that their joints get very distorted, kind of like arthritis, and they deteriorate. But that's not what's being described here when we look at Moses. What's being described here is something where the skin is changing in color and going white, which isn't leprosy, but that would be a type of skin disease. I believe the pronunciation is vitiligo. It was the disease that Michael Jackson had. Basically, what happens is it's a skin disease which causes the pigment to disappear. So someone who is dark-skinned eventually will look like they're light-skinned. I just thought I would point out that the word leprosy might not be the best translation. Also, you can see the third sign was that they were supposed to take water out of the river Nile, pour it on the ground, and then the water was going to turn into blood. So the three signs given by the Lord was the staff of Moses would turn into a serpent, the hand of Moses would go as white as snow when he stuck it into his cloak, and water drawn from the Nile would pour as blood on the ground. Moses was not confident in his speech, so God appointed Aaron to be the mouth of Moses. If we take a look at this lineage from Abraham, if we go down to Sarah and then Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, Leah had children which were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Levi, or the Levites, is where Moses and Aaron descend from. In Exodus 4:15, it reads, "You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth," Aaron that is, "and I will be your mouth, and with his mouth you will teach you, and with his mouth and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him." This is important. Remember this. "And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs." The Lord told Moses exactly what his plan was for him in Egypt. In Exodus 4:21 to 26, it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all the things, those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart, that he will not let the people go." So Moses knew before even going into the situation that God was going to actually stop the Pharaoh from letting the people go. So God himself was going to make the Pharaoh not let the people go. And there's a reason for it, and you'll see later. "And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn." The Israelites were to dedicate their firstborn to the Lord. So if you're an only child in the family, or you're the oldest in the family, you are automatically supposed to be dedicated to God. You read about this in Exodus 13:14 to 16. "Then said the Lord to Moses, Dedicate to me every firstborn among the Israelites. The first offspring to be born of both humans and animals belongs to me." So Moses said to the people, "This is a day to remember forever. The day you left Egypt, the place of your slavery. Today the Lord has brought you out by the power of his mighty hand. Remember, eat no food containing yeast." So right here, you can start to see the Passover. "On this day in the early spring, in the month of Abib," again, that's the first month of the year, that's the Passover, "you have been set free. You must celebrate this event in the month each year after the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites. He swore to your ancestors that he would give you this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. For 7 years, the bread you eat must be made without yeast." For 7 days. "On the 7th day, celebrate a feast to the Lord. Eat bread without yeast during those 7 days. In fact, there must be no yeast there must be no yeast bread or any yeast at all found within the borders of your land during this time." During the first Passover is when Moses explained the firstborn child must be dedicated to God. Why did God desire to kill Moses after he told him to tell the Pharaoh Israel was his first son? It's a really random looking scene that's confused a lot of scholars. It says in Exodus 4:24 to 26, "At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, 'Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me.' So he let him alone. And it was then she said, 'A bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision.'" So I'm going to point out something here. When you read the first sentence, you assume that it's Moses, but you can't actually tell for sure based on the language. The Lord might have actually been coming for Moses' son, not for Moses. Let's look at Genesis 17:9 to 11. "Then God said to Abraham, As for you, You must keep my covenant, and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you. The covenant you are to keep is this: every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. So what was the covenant between Abraham and God? The covenant of circumcision. And so this was supposed to be an everlasting covenant. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. So in other words, if you were to take on slaves, they'd have to be circumcised too. Whether born in your household or bought with money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Now, before I go on, when we get to the New Testament, we can obviously see there's a little bit of change here, because when we talk about the Gentiles, Paul gives a very different message to the Gentiles, because this is a huge point of controversy. But at this time in the Bible, yes, this is extremely valid. This was a law that came down in Genesis. So before we have the 10 Commandments, remember, Moses was the one that brought the 10 Commandments, but we're already seeing rules that are in place. Here's a covenant's an agreement. So this agreement was made before the 10 Commandments were even handed down. So Moses hadn't circumcised his firstborn son, which was among the laws of his ancestors. It would seem that Moses had effectively raised his son as a Midianite. Remember, he married a Midianite. He hadn't circumcised him on the 8th day as God had commanded Abraham and all his descendants to do, which we just read in Genesis 21-4. Perhaps Moses had deferred to Midianite customs out of respect for his father-in-law Jethro. The fact that God deals directly with Zipporah, however, suggests that she had been a part of the reason for this inappropriate delay. Zipporah knew exactly what to do when the life of Moses was in jeopardy, which means she knew their son not being circumcised was a problem. So remember, when you read that verse, it may not be speaking about Moses. It might actually be speaking about her child. So what might have happened is there might have been a problem with the child when it was sleeping. She noticed it, and then she realized what the issue was, and she immediately responded. Moses was also symbolizing Christ, if you had noticed. Remember, Moses was a god to Aaron. Moses rode with his family into Egypt, specifically on a donkey. Now that connects us to Matthew 21, 1-11, because Christ comes riding in on a donkey, a colt. Moses held a staff in his hand, which was the staff of God. Remember, kings in the Bible, they hold a scepter. Judah, for example, had a scepter. We saw that later we saw that earlier. So the kings would typically hold a scepter. So the staff of God represented the scepter of God. So Moses was holding the position of Christ. Moses was going to free his people from Egypt, while Christ was going to free his people as well. He's the savior. Moses was called the bridegroom of blood, while Christ is also called the bridegroom. So there is a lot of parallels between Moses and Christ, and the idea of Moses taking the people out of Egypt the same way that Christ is going to take us all out of Babylon. Every sign Moses was to perform was to be with the staff of God in hand. The staff of God represented Christ, which means every miracle Moses performed was actually through Christ. Numbers 17, 6-8. So Moses spoke to the Israelites and to their leaders, gave them 12 staffs, one for each leader of their ancestral tribes, and Aaron's staff was among them. Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the covenant law. The next day, Moses entered the tent and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, had not only sprouted, but budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. It's not exactly normal to take a dead piece of wood, whether it be a log or a stick, and then see it grow or blossom. So in this situation here, we have this odd situation where one of the staffs of the 12, remember, each one of the tribes, they had a staff. So that was to represent the tribal leader. Well, here we can see Aaron is the tribal leader of the Levites. Now, since only each tribe had a staff, the staff that Aaron held was likely Moses' staff. So the same staff that Moses had to perform all the miracles with was the same staff that later started to bud. The staff of Moses was given to Aaron, and it budded like a living tree because it represented Christ. Christ is known as the living vine. So here we have what looks like a dead piece of wood, but it starts to bud and blossom. Now, the next question you should have, if you're reading very carefully, is who is the father-in-law of Moses? If you read carefully, you'll notice that you've heard a couple names already. Exodus 2:20. And where is he? Reuel asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. So the first name that we see here is Reuel. Exodus 4:18. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Judges 4:11. Now Heber the Kenite, which was of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had severed himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent unto the plain of Zenaim, which is by Kadesh. It became generally accepted that the father-in-law of Moses had 7 names. The first one you heard was Reuel. The third one, Jethro, that shows up a little bit later. But there was also Jether, Hobab, which you've seen, Heber, Kenai, and Putiel. So Exodus 4 overview. Moses asked God, what should he do if his people do not believe he spoke to the Lord, and the Lord gave him 3 signs. The first sign was turning the staff of Moses into a serpent when he threw it on the ground. The second sign was turning the hand of Moses white like snow when he stuck it in his cloak. The third sign was to take water from the Nile and pour it on the ground, which would turn into blood. Moses told the Lord that he was not a strong speaker, which made the Lord angry, but he allowed Moses to have his brother Aaron to be his mouth. Moses was instructed that he was to put the words of God that he had gave him into the mouth of Aaron, who would speak for him. Moses was to be a God to Aaron. Moses was told to take the staff, which he was to do all the different signs. Moses spoke to his father-in-law Jethro, or Reuel, and requested to go back to see if his brothers in Egypt were still alive, who told him to go in peace. The Lord said to Moses in Midian to go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking his life were dead. When Moses left Midian, he rode on a donkey, just like Christ, with his family and carrying the staff of God. The Lord told Moses he would harden the Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the Israelites leave. And Moses was instructed to say, Israel is the Lord's firstborn, and to let him go worship. So this goes back to the firstborn dedication we see later in the book of Exodus. Moses stopped to lodge, and the Lord sought to put Moses to death. But Zipporah cut the foreskin of their son and touched it upon the feet of Moses, which caused him to be left alone. But again, we don't know for sure whether it was Moses or the child. It doesn't actually clearly define it. I would believe it's the child. Zipporah states that Moses is a bridegroom of blood. Now remember, since Moses is God to Aaron and Moses is paralleling Christ, Christ is the bridegroom. The Lord spoke to Aaron, and he met Moses in the wilderness, where Moses spoke the words the Lord commanded him. And then they gathered the elders of Israel, performed the signs, spoke the words provided by God, and the people bowed to worship. Exodus 5. So Exodus 5, what we're seeing is a continuation of this conversation, because really what's going on here is Moses is bringing back and forth the message he gets from the Lord when he would go speak to the Lord, and they would come back to Egypt and he would relay that message. So we're going to go to an overview of Exodus 5. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and told him to let his people go so that they may go into the wilderness to hold a festival. Now we can't tell exactly what festival it is. We would be guessing. I tried to guess it was the Feast of Booths, but you have to remember, these festivals don't actually come up until later in the Bible. So for us to guess, we'd have to know the time of year first. Pharaoh asked, who is the Lord? And they told him, the God of the Hebrews, who would strike them with a plague or by the sword if they didn't offer their sacrifices. The Pharaoh accused Moses and Aaron of taking the people away from their work and increased their work so they would have their minds off of their God. The slave drivers sent the message the Pharaoh would no longer supply straw to make bricks, but their quota of work would still remain the same. The Israelites appealed to the Pharaoh, who accused them of being lazy, which is why they wanted to leave and perform their sacrifices. The Israelites left Pharaoh, then found Moses and Aaron. They said that they were now seen as obnoxious to the Pharaoh and his officials, and a sword had been put in their hands to kill them. Moses spoke to the Lord and asked why this trouble has been brought on his people and that God was not rescuing them. So remember, God promised to deliver them. And at this point, Moses is thinking, wow, this situation's much worse than when it started. Exodus 6. God converses with Moses some more. The Israelites were not happy with Moses or Aaron, as we saw from the last chapter. The Lord reminds Moses, he remembers his covenant, and this situation would lead to acts of judgment and redemption. So the reason why the Pharaoh was not letting the people go was because God was hardening his heart. And the reason why God was hardening the Pharaoh's heart was because he wanted to prove to the Israelites who the living God was. And through these acts of judgment and then redemption, they would see who their Redeemer was. Exodus 6:2-3. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So this word God Almighty is the word El Shaddai. And if you take a look beside this, it says, by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So actually, if you go back and we take a look at the book of Genesis, which we already read, we'll find that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if we look at the three occasions when they had spoke to God, he does identify himself specifically as God Almighty, El Shaddai. The name Lord is not showing up there. The issue, though, is that when the Torah was written by Moses. And so Moses wouldn't have written the name of the Lord as the way he knew it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Lord told Moses that the name Lord was not how his ancestors referred to God. Exodus 6:20. Amram married his father's sister Jochebed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. So reading this verse here, we find out who the mother of Moses is and also the mother of Aaron. So Jochebed, why is this important? Because this directly connects to Exodus 6:3. If you look at the name Jochebed, Jochebed means the Lord is glory. So this is the mother of Moses. So her name is actually a combination of the words Yahweh and Kabed. So Jochebed, Yahweh and Kabed. We got a major problem though. How can the mother of Moses contain the name of God when God first revealed his name to Moses? So in other words, how can this name Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, how could it exist in Jochebed's name if we're seeing that the name of God is being first revealed to Moses in Exodus 3:14? That doesn't make any sense. So then where did this name Yahweh come from? Remember, the name Yahweh, we believe, came from the book of Genesis, chapter 4, and then 26, when all of a sudden men weren't proclaiming the name of God. Men were profaning, they were defiling. The Hebrew word is shalal. They were likely calling themselves by the name of God. And this eventually looks like it got distorted into the sun god. So Yahweh started to be associated with the sun. Is God the sun? No. But it looks like the individuals who had deified themselves with this name have an association to the worship of the sun. And we've studied this before during the Sabbath. They're called the Shashu of Yahweh. The first place we actually found the name Yahweh written down was before the Torah. And that was actually written in Egypt. We also find in the Vox Latina. The Vox Latina is how you properly pronounce Latin. If you try to pronounce Latin today, you're going to try to pronounce it with an English tongue. This book will tell you exactly how to pronounce the consonants and vowels. So what's interesting is when we take a look at the name Yahweh, or we look at the word Jovi, Jovi is Jupiter. Jupiter was a Roman god. This name Jupiter shows up everywhere. In Babylon, his name was Marduk. In India, the name was Indra. So this name is quite flexible in Asia. It's changed quite a bit. But when we take this name Jovi, which is Jupiter, and we translate it or we pronounce it, as we would as someone speaking it with a Latin tongue, it's not pronounced Jovi. It's pronounced Yovi or Yahweh. So the name Yahweh, this pronunciation Yahweh and later Jehovah, this is actually based on a name that looks like it was pointed to Jupiter, which was a sun god. So it would make a lot of sense why the Lord would point out, don't call me Lord later in the Bible, because Lord was being used by other nations. But specifically, we can see here that this name Yahweh was being applied, looks like, to Jupiter. The uncircumcised lips of Moses. In Exodus 6:10, it says, "So the Lord said to Moses, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips." Exodus 6:28 to 30 says it again. "On the day when the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all I say to you. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will the Pharaoh listen to me?" Was Moses circumcised? That's the question. What does he mean by uncircumcised lips? Exodus 12:48. "If a stranger shall sojourn with you and keep the Passover to the Lord, let all the males be circumcised. Then he may come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person shall eat of it." So later we find out with the keeping of the Passover, you're not allowed to keep the Passover if you're uncircumcised. So did Moses keep the Passover? He did. So then he must have been circumcised. While Moses was not explicitly said to be circumcised, we know that he did eat the Passover feast. And here's the important point. He was originally raised by an Israelite mother. Exodus 2:1-2. "Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months." Now, if you remember, when does the circumcision happen? After 8 days. Well, his mother had him for 3 months. So assuming that she kept the tradition of her ancestors, Moses would have been circumcised just like his other brothers would have been. So Exodus 6. "Moses was tending the sheep of Jethro when he came to Mount Horeb." Oops. My apologies. I've got the wrong bullet points up here. So I'm going to just skip over this piece here, and I'm going to move on to our bonus content. I'll add this to the video later. The bonus content I added actually overlaps with some of what we read today. The bonus content is the seal of the living God. So both God and the beast have a seal. Most people are completely aware that there's the mark of the beast. Christians, non-Christians, people of different religions, they've probably heard of the idea of 666, the mark of the beast. But most Christians, from what I find, they don't actually know that God has a seal as well. So we have a seal of God and we have a counterfeit seal of the beast. Revelation 13:16. "And the second beast required all the people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead." So pay attention, right hand or forehead, "so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark." But there's more. When people read this, they don't read all of 17 properly. I actually color coded it so you could see it's not what you think. "So that no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of its name. Here's the wisdom. Let him who hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. This is an old school way of saying 666. A score, I believe, is 12. Actually, a score is 20. "In the end times, no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark, they had the name of the beast, or they had the number of its name, which is 666. People put so much focus into the number that they don't notice that there's actually a couple of things being communicated here. Babylon and the beast work together to deceive the world into being marked. So Babylon, we found out, is some kind of a system of worship. And we know that Babylon sits on top of the beast. So the beast is what carries Babylon. So if the beast was associated to, for say, the government or the state, well, then the Babylon symbol would represent the church. So then when we talk about Babylon sitting on the beast, we're actually talking about the church sitting on the state. Revelation 19:20. But the beast was captured along with the false prophet, who on its behalf had performed signs, deceiving those who had the mark of the beast and worshipped its name. Both the beast and the false prophet were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Okay, so
what's the beast going to do with the false prophet? Going to deceive you into getting marked. So their job is to trick you. And both of them end up going to hell. But we have to remember that God also has a seal. So God had a seal that came first. The mark of the beast came second. It's the counterfeit. In Revelation 7:1-3, after this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming from the east, having the seal of the living God. I'll repeat that, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the forehead of the servants of our God. So here we can see in the book of Revelation, arguably, this is the end times. That's the last book of the Bible. Well, we can see that there's a seal of God that shows up in the last book of the Bible. The Passover is actually part of the seal of God mentioned in the book of Revelation. Exodus 13:8-10, on the 7th day, now keep in mind, this is all talking about the Passover, just a little bit in. On the 7th day, you must explain to your children, I'm celebrating what the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. This annual festival will be a visible sign to you, like a mark branded on your hand or your forehead. Let it remind you always to recite this teaching of the Lord. With a strong hand, the Lord rescued you from Egypt. So observe the decree of this festival at the appointed time each year. So the mark in this case, in regards to Exodus, is the mark of keeping the Passover. Let's look at Deuteronomy, though. There's more. Deuteronomy 6:1-7. These are the commandments and statutes and ordinances that the Lord your God has instructed me to teach you to follow in the land that you are about to enter and possess. So this is actually the second time in the Bible we're hearing the 10 commandments. The first time we hear it in Exodus. This is the second time. So that you and your children and your grandchildren may fear the Lord your God all the days of your lives by keeping his statutes and commandments that I give you, and so that your days may be prolonged. Okay, so in the Old Testament, we can see your days would be prolonged. You would live a longer life if you kept the 10 commandments given to Moses. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe them, so that you may prosper and multiply greatly in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These words I am commanding you today are to be upon your hearts. So this we can see in the New Testament. In the New Testament, it tells you the 10 commandments are written on your heart. Here we can see in the book of Deuteronomy, this law that Moses was providing was going to be written upon their hearts. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Here it is. Tie them as reminders on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. Write this verse down, because if anyone argues with you and tells you the law's been done away with, you need to point out that the seal of God is associated to the 10 commandments, and you can see it in the book of Deuteronomy, and you can also see in the book of Exodus talking about the Passover. They've got nowhere to wiggle with. There's no wiggle room here. Deuteronomy 6:8, I'll repeat it. Tie them. Tie what? Tie the 10 commandments as reminders on your hands and bind them to your foreheads. Now you can see why it was important to keep the Passover. If you remember, there's 9 biblical holidays. 2 of those holy days were created by the Israelites themselves, but the other 7, they were commanded by God, with the exception of 1, the Feast of Trumpets. So then we have 6 holy days, which you have to keep. Well, if there's 6 holy days you have to keep, that makes part of the law, the 10 commandments. So then here we can see that whether we're talking about the Passover as a single holy day, or we're talking about all the holy days that were commanded, we can look at Deuteronomy 6 and we can look at Exodus and see it's not just the Passover that's the seal of God. It's keeping the commandments of God. So the statutes and commandments are, in fact, the seal of God. So the seal of God is the 10 commandments. The 9 holy days are part of that law. We were commanded to keep, and I wrote 7, but it's actually 6 because the Feast of Trumpets was one that wasn't commanded, but the other 6 were, and Passover was one of them. If the 10 commandments were done away with, what is the seal of God mentioned in Revelation? If the law is done away with, where's your seal? Perhaps you are misunderstanding what Paul meant by grace. Paul did not say you had the grace to sin. Are you wearing the seal of God? Do you try to keep all of the law? Or are you practicing something else? You'll see Yule. We know Yule is Christmas. Halloween is Samhain. Valentine's Day, Imbolc. Easter, Ostara. Are you keeping the law of God, or are you mixing it with something else? Now, is it okay to keep the 10 commandments and keep these simultaneously? Let's find out. Can you worship both God and Satan? That's really the question I'm asking. Deuteronomy 29, 13 and 19. Make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to go and worship the God of the other nations. Make sure there is no root among you that bears such a poisonous and bitter fruit. Because when such a person hears the words of this oath, he invokes a blessing on himself, saying, I will have peace, even though I walk in the stubbornness of my own heart. This will bring disaster on the watered land as well as the dry. The Lord will never be willing to forgive him. Instead, his anger and jealousy will burn against that man, and every curse written on this book will fall upon him. The Lord will blot out his name from under heaven and single him out from all the tribes of Israel for disaster, according to all the curses of the covenant written in this book of the law. So, can you keep the holidays of the Bible and keep the holidays of the Gentiles? You can't, because the Gentile holidays are associated to other gods. So you can walk around thinking that you'll have peace and you'll be saved, but that's in the own stubbornness of your heart. Jeremiah 7, 9 to 11. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods you have not known? And then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we are delivered, so we can continue in all these abominations. So here are 2 separate verses to tell you, you cannot do both. Can you worship God and worship Satan? No, you must choose. And choosing both is still choosing Satan.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. If you hear the watchman's call, please repent and seek out Jesus Christ. There is still time. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.